The galaxy of Andromeda sparkled with vibrant nebulae, scattered asteroid fields, and civilizations that had evolved over millennia. In the heart of this universe ruled King Arthal, the sovereign of Andromeda, a powerful and feared leader who ensured his enemies respected the boundaries of his realm. His daughter, Princess Lysara, was renowned for her intelligence, strategic mind, and undeniable beauty. With flowing silver hair and eyes that reflected the very stars she ruled over, she was adored and feared in equal measure. Yet Lysara was no mere ornament in her father's court. She was trained in the art of war, diplomacy, and had a mind sharpened by science and tactics. Her loyalty to her father was unquestionable, and her purpose clear, to one day rule Andromeda alongside him, defending it from invaders. On the other side of the universe lay the Orion cluster, an equally powerful empire, but one with starkly different values. Prince Kael of Orion had grown up under the shadow of war, bred to despise Andromeda and its ruling family. As a skilled pilot and a soldier, Kael was groomed to lead Orion's forces against Andromeda. But Kael was different from his father, Emperor Draxus. While he outwardly supported the idea of expanding their empire through conquest, he was inwardly disillusioned by the endless cycle of war and destruction. There had to be another way, he often thought. Fate intervened during a rare galactic summit on the neutral planet of Viridian. It was an attempt to bring a temporary truce between the warring galaxies. As a representative of their respective kingdoms, Lysara and Kael were forced to attend, to keep appearances for their people. When their eyes met across the grand hall of Viridian's central city, it was as if the universe momentarily paused. Lysara had expected a barbaric, brutish prince, but instead, she saw a man of elegance and mystery. Kael, too, was taken aback by the composure and strength Lysara exuded. The summit was tense, with political posturing and veiled threats exchanged. But Lysara and Kael found themselves drawn to one another, speaking in brief moments away from the watchful eyes of their councils. They were bound by the stars, yet separated by duty. For the first time, Kael felt the weight of his family's legacy as a curse, and Lysara began to question the unyielding hatred her father had drilled into her about the Orion cluster. Their secret conversations became more frequent as the summit continued, yet danger loomed at every corner. Both knew that their meetings, if discovered, would lead to disastrous consequences. And with the fragile peace between their galaxies hanging by a thread, neither could afford to show weakness or distraction. But as they grew closer, so did the shadow of betrayal. For Kael harbored a secret that could destroy everything between them. A secret plan, designed by his father, that would soon be set in motion. The summit had ended in a stalemate. Tensions remained high between the two galaxies, but for now, there was an uneasy peace. Kael returned to the Orion cluster, haunted by his interactions with Lysara. His father, Emperor Draxus, had noticed the change in his son, and he was not pleased. "You're distracted," Draxus snarled, his voice a low growl as he paced the grand war room. "Your mind is not on the task at hand." Kael stood straight, his face emotionless, though his thoughts were far from steady. The summit was a charade. The Andromedans have no interest in peace, and neither do we. His father's dark eyes narrowed, watching his son with suspicion. "I hope that is true, Kael. For your sake." But the truth was far more complex. A spark had ignited between him and Lysara, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't extinguish it. When alone, he would think of her, her sharp wit, her gaze that seemed to pierce his very soul. He had never felt such a connection, yet it was dangerous, forbidden. Little did Kael know that Lysara was grappling with the same emotions. Back in Andromeda, she carried out her duties as the crown princess, but she couldn't shake the memory of Kael's deep, conflicted eyes. There was something about him that defied the image of the enemy her father had instilled in her mind. But she knew, deep down, that nothing could come from their attraction. Her loyalty to her father, to Andromeda, had to come first. One night, while Kael was reviewing battle strategies in his private chamber, a transmission came through, a message encrypted and marked as urgent. It was from his father's chief military strategist. "The plan is in motion, my prince," the strategist's voice crackled through the device. "The fleet will depart in 3 days. Andromeda will fall." Kael's blood ran cold. He had known of the plan, but it had always seemed distant, a hypothetical future. Now, it was real. His father intended to launch a surprise attack on Andromeda, under the guise of the peace talks. And he, Kael, was expected to lead the invasion. The crushing weight of duty and honor bore down on him. He knew what was expected, yet his heart screamed otherwise. Could he betray Lysara like this? She was the daughter of his enemy, yes, but she was also the woman who had stirred something in him that he couldn't explain. And now, that very connection threatened everything. Desperate, Kael made a decision. He would warn Lysara. Lysara sat in her chamber, looking out over the vast expanse of stars that surrounded the Andromedan capital. Her mind was troubled, thoughts of Kael lingering against her will. She had always believed in her father's vision for Andromeda, in the need to defend their empire at all costs. But now, for the first time, doubt had taken root. Her musings were interrupted by a sudden beep from her private communication device. A message. It was encrypted, but she recognized the code immediately. It was from Kael. Heart racing, she activated the device. His voice, calm but urgent, filled her chamber. "Lysara, there's no time to explain in detail. I'm breaking every rule, but you have to know, my father is planning an invasion. Andromeda is in danger. You must prepare." Her heart clenched. She had known this was inevitable, but hearing it from him, hearing the fear and desperation in his voice, made it real. She quickly sent a reply, her fingers trembling over the console. "Why are you telling me this, Kael? You risk everything." There was a long pause before his answer came. "Because I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. I'm not my father, Lysara. I don't want this war." Lysara stared at the message, torn between duty and her own growing emotions. She couldn't afford to trust him, not completely. But could she afford not to? As the Andromedan War Council convened to prepare for the inevitable, Lysara's thoughts remained locked on the impending conflict, and on Kael. Somewhere deep within, she made a promise: if this war was coming, she would end it, one way or another. Kael stood on the bridge of his command ship, the weight of his father's expectations pressing down on him. The fleet was gathered, their weapons ready, and soon they would set off towards Andromeda. It would be a war unlike any before, a final confrontation between two galactic superpowers. But Kael's mind was elsewhere. His conversation with Lysara had left him conflicted, unsure of where his true loyalties lay. Could he really betray his own people for her? Could he let his father's empire burn just to save the daughter of his enemy? Before he could dwell further, his father's voice boomed over the intercom. "Prepare for launch. Andromeda will be ours." As the countdown began, Kael realized he was running out of time. There was only one way to stop this madness, but it would require the ultimate risk: betrayal. Not just of his father, but of everything he had ever known. With his heart pounding, Kael made a choice. He would fight, for Lysara, for peace, and for the future they might build together. Even if it meant becoming the enemy of his own people. As his ship shot forward, heading straight for the heart of Andromeda, Kael knew there was no turning back. The war had begun, but the battle for his soul was only just starting. The invasion had begun. The skies above Andromeda were lit with the streaks of ion blasts and the flares of clashing starships. Lysara stood on the balcony of the war room, overlooking the chaos from the capital's fortified citadel. The sirens blared, and the war council was in disarray. Andromeda had been caught off guard, just as Kael had warned. Her father's voice boomed in the council chamber behind her: giving orders to rally their fleet, but Lysara was focused on something else. She knew Kael was out there, leading the Orion forces, despite the message he had sent. Had his warning been a ploy, a tactic to lure them into a false sense of security? Or had he truly risked everything to betray his father? The question gnawed at her, but there was no time for doubt. She had to act, and she had to do it now. She returned to the War Council, her eyes blazing with determination. "We need to strike their command ship," Lysara said firmly, interrupting the chaotic debate among her father's generals. "Cut the head off the snake, and the rest will crumble." Her father, King Arthal, turned to her, his face a mask of stern resolve. "You suggest we target Prince Kael directly? You think he's their weakness?" Lysara's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't reveal what she knew, not without raising suspicions. "I've studied their fleet's movements. Kael's command ship is at the heart of their formation. If we disable it, the Orion forces will lose coordination." Arthal considered her words carefully, nodding. "Then it's settled. You will lead the strike. If we succeed, this war ends today." As the fleet mobilized, Lysara prepared for battle. She knew this mission would bring her face to face with Kael, but what would happen when they met? Would he fight for his father, or would he stand with her? The answer would come soon enough. Kael stood at the helm of his command ship, watching as his fleet pressed deeper into Andromeda's defenses. His father's voice crackled over the comms, giving orders, but Kael barely heard him. His thoughts were consumed by the message he had sent to Lysara. He had warned her, but now, seeing the devastation his forces were causing, he wondered if it had been enough. He knew Lysara would be in the thick of the battle. She wasn't the type to hide behind palace walls. He had seen her strength, her will to protect her people, and he admired it, loved it, even. And now, his heart ached with the knowledge that he might have to face her in combat. "Prince Kael," a voice interrupted his thoughts. His second-in-command approached, a grim look on his face. "The Andromedan fleet is rallying. They're targeting us." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Prepare the defenses. And keep our communications open. I want to know their every move." As the Orion fleet shifted formation, Kael's mind raced. Lysara was coming for him. He had known this was inevitable, but now that the moment was here, he wasn't sure what he would do. Could he fight her? Could he betray his father, his people, for the woman he had fallen in love with? The battle outside intensified. Explosions rocked the ship as Andromedan fighters engaged the Orion forces. Kael's hands tightened around the controls of his command console. His father's voice echoed through the comms, urging him to press the attack, to destroy Andromeda once and for all. But Kael hesitated. He couldn't follow through with this. Not anymore. Just then, his ship was hit by a direct blast, sending him tumbling across the bridge. Alarms blared, and sparks flew from the control panels. He struggled to his feet, his heart pounding. The Andromedans had breached his defenses. Lysara was here. Lysara's fighter broke through the Orion fleet, weaving through the debris of destroyed ships. Her heart raced as she approached Kael's command ship. She had trained for this moment her entire life, to defeat the enemy, to protect her people. But now, standing on the precipice of victory, she found herself hesitating. Was Kael really the enemy? Could she kill the man who had risked everything to warn her? Her comms crackled to life. "Princess, we're in position. We can take out their command ship with a single strike. Just give the order." Lysara's hand hovered over the controls. She could end this war right now, but at what cost? She knew Kael was on that ship. She knew that if she gave the order, she would be condemning him to death. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, Andromeda must be protected at all costs. But another voice, softer, more insistent, whispered, "There is another way." Taking a deep breath, Lysara made her decision. "Hold your fire," she ordered. "I'm boarding the ship." Her second-in-command protested. "Princess, that's too dangerous. We can end this here and now." "Hold your fire," she repeated, more firmly this time. "I'm going alone." With her heart pounding in her chest, Lysara guided her fighter into the docking bay of Kael's ship. She disembarked, her pulse racing as she stepped onto the enemy vessel. The ship was eerily quiet as she made her way to the bridge. When the doors slid open, she found Kael waiting for her, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "You came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had to," Lysara replied, her hand resting on the hilt of her plasma sword. "But I don't know why." Kael stepped forward, his gaze locked on hers. "Because you know, just as I do, that this war is wrong. That it doesn't have to end in bloodshed." Lysara's heart ached with the truth of his words. She had been raised to believe that Orion was the enemy, that peace was impossible. But standing here, face to face with Kael, she knew that wasn't true. "There's still time to stop this," Kael said, his voice urgent. "We can end this war, together." Lysara hesitated, her mind torn between duty and desire. Could she really trust him? Could she betray her father, her people, for the chance at peace? But deep down, she already knew the answer. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steady. "But how do we stop it?" Kael smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "We disable the Orion fleet's command systems. Without central coordination, my father won't be able to press the attack." Lysara nodded. "Then let's end this." The battle raged on as Kael and Lysara worked together to sabotage the Orion fleet systems. They moved quickly, disabling the command relays that controlled the fleet's movements. Kael knew it was only a matter of time before his father realized what was happening, but by then, it would be too late. As the last relay was destroyed, the Orion fleet fell into disarray. Ships veered off course, their weapons systems malfunctioning. The Andromedan forces quickly took advantage of the chaos, disabling the Orion ships without causing further destruction. Kael and Lysara stood on the bridge of his ship, watching as the battle came to an abrupt end. The war was over. But the real challenge was just beginning. Kael turned to Lysara, his eyes filled with hope and uncertainty. "What now?" Lysara smiled, a sense of peace washing over her for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "We rebuild. Together." They both knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be those who opposed their alliance, who sought to reignite the flames of war. But for now, there was peace, a fragile, hard-won peace. As the stars of Andromeda glittered around them, Kael and Lysara stood side by side, united by love and hope for a new future. A future where the Princess of Andromeda and the Prince of Orion could build a world without war. And in that moment, beneath the vast expanse of the galaxy, they knew that anything was possible.